Have you ever sat in a meeting, listening to a leader present their plan with absolute confidence and unshakable certainty? Everyone around you is nodding, swept up in their charisma. But deep down, you have this nagging feeling. The numbers they're presenting don't quite add up. Their logic has gaping holes. You try to speak up, to offer a different perspective, but you're waved away with a condescending smile. Trust me, they say. I know what I'm doing. And then, months later, when the project collapses, when the losses are announced, when everyone is left to deal with the fallout, that same leader seems the most surprised of all. They blame the market, the team, unforeseen factors. They seem genuinely incapable of understanding how it all went so wrong. What if I told you their unshakable confidence wasn't a sign of expertise, but was actually a symptom of profound incompetence? There is a powerful psychological trap at play here, a blind spot in the human mind that explains why the least capable people are often the loudest, the most certain. It isn't a rare defect. It's a feature of our mental operating system, and the scariest part is, you and I are not immune to it. By the end of this video, you won't just understand what this trap is, you will have a detailed blueprint to spot it in your colleagues, in the online experts, and most importantly, in your own reflection in the mirror. Let's begin. The trap we're talking about has a name that sounds academic, but describes a painfully common human experience, the Dunning-Kruger effect, named after social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. It's a well-researched cognitive bias. Simply put, it describes the tendency for people with low ability in a specific area to overestimate their own competence. But that definition barely scratches the surface. The real cruelty of the Dunning-Kruger effect lies in something called the double curse. The first curse is, of course, that their lack of skill leads them to make poor choices and come to wrong conclusions. But here's the second punch. The knockout blow, the second curse is that the very same lack of skill also robs them of the ability to realize they are incompetent. Think of it this way. To know you're singing off-key, you first need a baseline musical ability to distinguish between a right note and a wrong one. To recognize that your logical arguments are weak, you need logical reasoning skills. To see the difference between a sound argument and a fallacious one. People under the influence of the Dunning-Kruger effect lack that mental yardstick. Their brain isn't just giving them the wrong answers. It's taking away the tools they would need to check their own answers. So, to them, their ignorance looks and feels exactly like expertise. Their confidence is real. Their certainty is genuine. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Before we go deeper, let's be honest. That feeling of frustration when you read a social media comment from someone who's never read a single economics book, yet is lecturing on monetary policy with the confidence of a Nobel laureate? That sense of helplessness when a relative, whose own relationships are a constant drama, insists on giving you unsolicited marriage advice? That is the Dunning-Kruger effect in the wild. You're not alone in feeling this way. Feel seen? Good, because naming the beast is the first step to learning how to fight it. And as we're about to discover, sometimes the beast is staring right back at us from within. Now, we're not just going to glance at this effect. We are going to put it under the microscope. We'll explore its origins, its mechanisms, its common misunderstandings, and most importantly, why it is one of the most powerful, silent forces shaping our world. Our story begins in 1995 in Pittsburgh with a bank robber named MacArthur Wheeler. Wheeler walked into two banks in broad daylight, his face uncovered, and robbed them. Security cameras captured his face perfectly, and, of course, he was arrested later that night. When police showed him the surveillance tapes, Wheeler was in utter shock. He mumbled, "But I wore the juice." He had genuinely believed that rubbing lemon juice on his face would make him invisible to security cameras. He wasn't just wrong, he was blindly, confidently wrong. This story inspired to psychologists Dunning and Kruger. They wondered, is it possible that incompetence doesn't just cause failure, but also creates an inability to recognize that failure? To test this, They conducted a series of now classic studies at Cornell University in 1999. They gave undergraduate students tests in 3 domains: grammar, logic, and humor. After completing the tests, they asked each student to estimate how well they had performed relative to everyone else. The results were a stunning confirmation of their hypothesis. The students in the bottom 25%, the worst performers consistently, and dramatically overestimated their own performance. On average, they believed they had done better than 60% of the other participants, when in reality, they were at the 12th percentile. The gap between perception and reality was a chasm. Conversely, the top-performing students had a tendency to slightly underestimate their competence. They knew they were good, but they assumed that everyone else found the test just as easy. From these studies, the core definition was born: the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't about arrogance. It's a problem of metacognition, the ability to step back and think about your own thinking. It's the capacity for objective self-assessment. Low performers in a domain simply lack the metacognitive skill necessary to realize their own shortcomings. They are trapped in a cognitive bubble where everything they do seems correct. So, what's actually happening in the brain? Why does this double curse exist? Imagine you're learning a new skill, like chess. At first, you learn the basic moves: the pawn goes forward, the knight moves in an L shape, the king moves 1 square at a time. With this tiny bit of knowledge, you can play a game against another beginner and maybe even win. At this point, your brain can easily fall into a simple trap: chess isn't that hard. I'm pretty good at this. You are standing atop what psychologists call Mount Stupid. It's the very first phase of learning, where a little bit of knowledge creates the illusion of expertise. You know enough to feel confident, but you don't know enough to realize how much you're missing. You've never heard of complex openings like the Queen's Gambit. You haven't studied pawn structures. You don't understand the importance of center control. The universe of chess knowledge you don't know is vast, but it's completely invisible to you. This is the double curse in action. Your poor chess skill. The first curse prevents you from recognizing that the strategies you're using are basic and flawed. The second curse: you can only judge your performance with the limited toolkit of knowledge you possess. As you continue to learn, reading books, playing stronger opponents, analyzing games, you begin to see the true complexity of the game. You realize that what you thought were brilliant strategies were actually foolish blunders. Your confidence plummets. You fall into the valley of despair. This is a painful but critically important phase. It is the moment your metacognition begins to form. For the first time, you know what you don't know. Only after climbing out of this valley, through persistent study and practice, do you begin your ascent up the slope of enlightenment and eventually, perhaps, reach the plateau of sustainability where your competence and your confidence finally align. The Dunning-Kruger effect keeps people stranded on Mount Stupid. They never experience the shock of falling into the valley, and therefore, they never begin the real journey to getting better. Now, there are a couple of very common misconceptions about this effect that we need to clear up. First, this is not about general intelligence. A person can be a brilliant rocket scientist but be firmly on Mount Stupid when it comes to gardening or financial investing. The Dunning-Kruger effect is domain-specific. We are all experts in a few things and complete novices in thousands of others. The danger comes when we let our confidence from one domain unconsciously spill over into another. A gifted brain surgeon is not automatically qualified to give sound political advice. Second, it's not a life sentence. This isn't about labeling someone stupid and being done with it. As we saw in the growth model, the path out of Dunning-Kruger is education and practice. When the students in the original study were given training in logic and grammar, not only did their scores improve, but their ability to self-assess became significantly more accurate. They began to recognize their previous mistakes. This offers hope. Finally, and most importantly, this is not a them problem, it is an us problem. It is easy and deeply satisfying to spot the Dunning-Kruger effect in other people. Oh, my boss is a classic example. Or that guy in the comments is pure Dunning-Kruger. But that very act can be a trap in itself. The real challenge, the mark of maturity and wisdom, is to recognize that we all have blind spots. We all have our own personal Mount Stupids. The question isn't, am I affected by this? The question is, where am I being affected by this? Why does any of this matter? Because the Dunning-Kruger effect is not a harmless psychological quirk. It has devastating real-world consequences. Consider the workplace. A manager afflicted by Dunning-Kruger will shut down good ideas from their subordinates. Because they believe their own are inherently superior, they will micromanage their teams, distrusting others' expertise, stifling creativity and fostering a toxic work environment. They are the reason talented employees leave. Look at the online world. Social media has given Mount Stupid a global stage. People who have read a few headlines feel qualified to argue with epidemiologists about vaccines. People who have watched a few YouTube videos feel they can expose global conspiracies. The Dunning-Kruger effect, combined with social media algorithms, creates echo chambers that amplify misinformation and drive society into deep polarization. And consider our personal lives. A novice stock market investor who gets lucky a few times can fall under the illusion that they are a financial genius. They start taking bigger risks, ignoring cautious advice, and end up losing their life savings. They didn't just lose money. They lost their future, all because they couldn't distinguish between luck and skill. This effect is everywhere, silently sabotaging relationships, companies, and even democracies. Recognizing it isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's a necessary act of self-defense. And now we turn to the most important part: how to build a defense system. All right, we've dissected the problem. We've looked the beast in the eye. Now it's time to build the weapons. These aren't empty platitudes. This is the reality check blueprint, a setup for concrete, actionable strategies you can start using today to inoculate yourself against the Dunning-Kruger effect and make wiser decisions. Strategy 1. Become a feedback hunter. Seek honest, specific feedback. People stuck on Mount Stupid have a common trait. They either don't seek feedback, or they only seek validation. They ask questions like, "Did you like my presentation?" to get a polite answer. They dismiss constructive criticism by assuming the other person is jealous or just doesn't get it. You must do the polar opposite. Actively hunt for honest feedback, even when it stings. Don't just ask your friends who you know will always support you. Go to the people you respect for their expertise, the ones you know will give it to you straight, and get specific with your questions. Instead of, "Was that good?" ask, "What was the single weakest argument in my report?" If you could change one thing about the strategy I proposed, what would it be? Tell me about a moment during the talk where you felt your attention drift. Why? These questions don't allow for generic, polite answers. They force critical thinking and provide you with invaluable data. Listening to this feedback without getting defensive is a superpower. Treat every piece of criticism as a gift, a map showing you the path to getting better. Strategy 2. Maintain a beginner's mind. Always be a student. The moment you think you know it all in a given field is the moment the Dunning-Kruger effect starts to creep in. True expertise isn't a destination. It's a never-ending process of learning. Cultivate what is known as intellectual humility. What does this mean in practice? Read widely. Don't just read books and articles that confirm what you already believe. Actively seek out authors and thinkers who challenge your worldview. Follow true experts online. Be wary of people who only offer strong opinions without evidence. Follow the scientists, the researchers, the practitioners with decades of hands-on experience. Notice how they speak. They often admit complexity, nuance, and what the science doesn't yet know. That is the sign of true expertise. Say, "I don't know." These 3 words may be the most powerful tool against Dunning-Kruger. Admitting ignorance is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of confidence and wisdom. It opens the door to learning, whereas false confidence slams it shut. Remember, the more you learn, the more you will appreciate the vast ocean of knowledge you have yet to explore. That feeling of being overwhelmed is a good sign. It means you're moving away from the safe shores of Mount Stupid. Strategy 3. practice devil's advocate thinking. Brains are naturally wired to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms our existing beliefs. This is called confirmation bias, and it is the Dunning-Kruger effect's best friend. They form a deadly loop. Dunning-Kruger gives you the false confidence, and confirmation bias helps you find evidence to reinforce it. To break this loop, you must actively play devil's advocate with yourself. Before making a big decision or defending a strong opinion, stop and force yourself to answer these questions. What is the strongest evidence against my position? What smart, rational people disagree with me? What are their reasons? Imagine it's a year from now and this decision has failed spectacularly. What is the story of how it failed? This last exercise, called a premortem, forces you to look at the weaknesses and blind spots in your own planning. It's uncomfortable, but it's far more effective than conducting a postmortem after the disaster has already happened. Strategy 4. The game-changing question. If there is one single tool you take away from this video, I hope it's this one. It's a simple but profound test of true understanding, known as the ideological Turing test. The idea is simple. Before you claim to truly understand a topic, especially a controversial one, ask yourself this question: can I explain the opposing viewpoints to my own so fairly, accurately, and convincingly that a person who genuinely holds that view would nod and say, "Yes, you have articulated my position well"? If your answer is no, if you can only describe the opposing view as a caricature, as irrational or stupid, then you almost certainly do not understand the topic well enough. You are likely still standing on Mount Stupid. This question forces you to go beyond simply refuting other arguments. It forces you to genuinely understand them. And in that process, you may just find that your own position needs refinement. This is the pinnacle of intellectual humility and the most potent antidote to the Dunning-Kruger effect. These 4 strategies: hunting for feedback, maintaining a beginner's mind, playing devil's advocate, and using the game-changing question form a robust defense system. They are not easy, but they will help you replace blind confidence with earned confidence. And that makes all the difference in the world. We've been on a long journey from a naive bank robber with lemon juice to the labs of Cornell University, over the mountains of blind confidence and through the valleys of doubt. The ultimate lesson the Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us is not one about stupidity, but one about the nature of wisdom. It shows us that feeling uncertain, feeling a bit confused, or even admitting "I don't know" is often not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it is frequently a sign of progress. It is evidence that you have left Mount Stupid and are beginning the real climb toward expertise. In a world that celebrates loud confidence and quick answers, embracing complexity and acknowledging your limits is a quiet act of courage. The final message is not to doubt everything about yourself, but to cultivate a healthy curiosity and intellectual humility about all that we do not yet know, because true intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing how to ask the right questions and, most importantly, being willing to listen to answers that might change our minds. So, my question for you is this: how have you seen the Dunning-Kruger effect in your own life at work, in an online debate, or perhaps in a moment of honest reflection in yourself? Share your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations don't just help you, they help all of us in this community learn and grow wiser together. And if you found this video valuable, if you want to keep exploring the psychological blueprints that help you make sense of yourself and this complex world, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for your time, and stay curious.